But my name is Jason Brashatsky. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations at Mercersburg. This is my 23rd year at the school, somewhat of an interesting path in that I actually taught math there for 18 years, and this is now my 5th year in this role. And starting from early March, when we've kind of made this kind of shift to virtual engagement, we've been kind of running these things through a lot of April and May, coming into May, and they've been great and really a great opportunity to kind of highlight our alumni and to kind of help generate discussions. I do encourage you guys to take a future peek at our engagement page at mercersburg.edu/events. Coming up in the next couple of weeks, I think we've got some really great programming that could be interesting for you. Most notably, Rachel Porter, class of '09, and Dean Hosgood, class of '98, are both public health specialists, and they're going to be speaking about COVID-19 kind of from a public health perspective. That should be interesting. And there's other programming too that I encourage you to check out. But tonight's session is part of, it's really the last of our WeSpeak series, and WeSpeak was designed to recognize 50 years of coeducation at Mercersburg. And we've been trying to generate dialogue around issues of gender equity. And this has been great. And, a big thank you for everyone for coming, and especially for June Marquiss Pryor and Stephanie Turner McGraw, to alumni. June is originally from Chambersburg and was a 3-year student before graduating in 2001. While at Mercersburg, she was a member of the 15 and inductee to Clapway and varsity basketball captain. Following her graduation, she went on to earn a bachelor's degree in aeronautical and astronautical engineering from MIT. She first worked for Defense Technologies as an aeronautic engineer and is currently a senior software engineer for Volvo Trucks in Hagerstown, Maryland. She currently lives in Chambersburg with her husband, Jacob, and 2 kids, Ryan, age 10, and Adeline, age 3. Stephanie is originally from Hagerstown and was a 4-year student before her graduate in 2006. While she was at Mercersburg, she was a dorm prefect, a member of the 15, the Michelet Prize winner, and inductee to cum laude, and captain of the girls' lacrosse and soccer teams. She attended Pitzer College, where she was a double major in English and world literature and psychology. She then went on to earn her doctorate in clinical psychology from George Washington University. In 2014, she's now a licensed psychologist in West Virginia, and Maryland, and she's employed as a clinical assistant professor through West Virginia University School of Medicine. She divides her clinical time between WVU medicine hospitals, their outpatient behavioral medicine clinic in Martinsburg, their integrated primary care clinic in Harpers Ferry, and her own private practice, Western Maryland Psychology. In addition to working directly with patients in therapy and psychological assessment, she's the co-founder and training director of WVU Medicine, University Healthcare's doctoral psychology internship. Through her academic appointment with the School of Medicine, she teaches doctoral psychology students, medical students, postdoc fellows, and medical residents. She lives in Martinsburg, West Virginia with her husband, Ryan, and their 2 children, Kinsley and Will, and 3 dogs.
It was a bad decision. 3's too many. But we like
best practices for this has been to mute your microphone. Steph and June have a presentation that they're going to share, and then we'll be able to open it up for dialogue after that. If something comes up, feel free to use the chat window as you go on. We're also going to be videotaping this session and making it available for people that weren't able to make it. And at the end of the session, we'll be giving you, in my follow-up, I'll give you Steph's and June's email address if you have some follow-up questions that you'd like to follow up with her with. I also want to thank Jackie Grace, who's class of 2007 and is really running the technology throughout this session. And so welcome her as well. But with that, I'm going to hand it over to Steph and June, and then thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. We're excited to have some time to discuss some really interesting topics that are near and dear to our hearts tonight. So let me share my screen. Okay. See if that is all right. Yes. So as we get started, we're going to be talking about gender inequality in STEM education and really what some things we can do to right the ship. And I see a bunch of familiar faces, but I'm wondering what drew people to want to come to tonight's WeSpeak. Feel free to unmute yourself and share some things that you're hoping to get out of the talk so we can make sure to attend to those. Even if it was just to be here to support us, we like that too. But anybody want to share within this topic what they're most interested in hearing about tonight?
Going into college and then into the workplace, I'm kind of looking into how I can support the people around me and pursuing their fields of study and getting jobs and being successful in the future, both emotionally and professionally. So that's kind of where I'm at and why I'm part of this or tuning in.
Thanks, Jack. I think that answers everything that is right with the world in Mercer's work education, showing up to be here and to learn and to connect. I think that's huge. Thank you.
I came because I've visited with both of you in the last year and wanted to support you. But also, I have two daughters of my own, and they both have a good aptitude and interest in science and math, having done like some Lego things, some basic coding, some Snap kits. Do you know those, June? Yeah, so wanted to hear about, that for my own children's path in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
I may be unmuted. I'm on that front line, I guess, with teaching physics. That's all I've been teaching these days, the last 10 years. And I had my student rosters. And I'll say this year we had a big bump. One of my classes is all girls except for 3 boys, and the other ones are half. Now my AP physics class, I had 5 girls out of 13, which is extraordinary. Last year it was embarrassing. It wasn't. So this year looks good. I couldn't tell you what we're going to have next year, but I do think about these things. And I was in an embarrassing moment during a revisit day or a parents' weekend. And I had one female student in my APC mechanics E&M class, and the mother asked, "Do you have a hard time getting females to sign up for this course?" I froze, because I can talk about, the waves, the where we'll have a bump like we have this year, but I would like to know more. I think I've got an idea how to explain it, but it goes back. It's not necessarily, I think, the 9th grade where it starts. I think it goes back even further in the social norms, and I've come to understand that moment of empowerment, especially with females, it happens maybe in the 3rd or 4th grade, solving their first algebraic equation. Like, yeah, I can do this. And then something happens along the way where they just not interested anymore. And so I'd like to know more from the expert. So in your mind, and also maybe the incoming 9th graders, what we can do to maybe undo some of the that norm that may have set them on a different path. But this year, we look good. I couldn't tell you next year is going to be that way, but so thank you.
Great. Thank you, guys. So we'll keep those ideas in mind as as we progress through. We want this to be as interactive and conversational as possible. So feel free to unmute yourselves and ask questions or share experiences throughout. Let's see if this lets me, I have to click. Perhaps. There we go. So within this topic, we decided we're going to break it down into a couple of different parts tonight. First, we're going to set the stage. We're going to talk about some numbers and really survey the land, figure out where we are, what exactly are we talking about. And then within the topic of gender inequities, we're going to talk about three important topics. 1, microaggressions, 2, compensation and benefits, and 3, family planning. We'll open it up for questions and answers formally at the end, but like I said, stop us throughout. So it's undeniable. The face of science, technology, engineering, and math, they're changing. Women are entering these fields and professions at increasing rates, and it remains true that men continue to outnumber women within the fields. Those numbers become even more drastic at the higher ends of profession, which means that our leadership, our supervisors, our teachers, they don't necessarily accurately represent the diversity of the individuals that they're leading. One of the things that I think stands out about this slide in particular is we're looking here at women and men working within STEM fields by the percent of the college graduates. So we look at all college graduates. Based on these numbers, we're seeing about 7 to 8% of women are in STEM majors and then working in STEM fields, and about 15 to 18% of men. But within the STEM majors, there is not a single line where women are outranking men. So these continue to be male-dominated fields. We know that in elementary, middle, and sometimes even high school, girls and boys take math and science courses in roughly equal numbers. This means that from an academic standpoint, boys and girls should be equally prepared to pursue science and engineering majors within college. This doesn't happen though. By graduation, men outnumber women in nearly every science and engineering field, and in some such as physics, engineering, and computer science, the difference is dramatic, with women earning only 20% of bachelor's degrees. This gender discrepancy is so crucial because it perpetuates an uneven distribution of power, wealth, and occupational stability between men and women. So, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 93 out of 100 STEM occupations have wages above the national average. This pattern can be seen amongst the list of the top 25 highest paid college majors, which is on this slide, and includes 20 different types of engineering. So if we average out the starting salaries among these higher paid college majors, we find that there is a 20% increase in pay over the national average. It's a huge amount of additional resources, especially if we're talking about individuals early in their careers and perceptions. Various researchers, including Microsoft, have found that under 7% of women graduate college with a STEM degree. This is compared to roughly 15% of men who graduated in 2016 within the STEM field. In fact, in 2016, twice as many men than women graduated with a STEM degree. When we break down the data even further to evaluate what STEM degrees women choose, we find some interesting pieces of information. We find that engineering is nowhere on the top 14 female-dominated majors. And in fact, within STEM, there were only 15 majors where women outranked men. When we compare this to their male counterparts, an engineering-related degree completely encompasses the top 10. So, when we put these graphs up together, we see that the 15 STEM majors where women outnumber men, their early career salaries range from about $32,000 to $62,000, with clustering around $40,000. Meanwhile, the top 15 most male-dominated STEM majors range in early career salaries from $40,000 to over $90,000. There's a huge pay difference even within this field. So while parents, teachers, the community may be really supporting movement towards STEM majors, we're seeing an uneven distribution of the resources within these fields. Thoughts? Reactions? Does this come as a surprise? Is this consistent with what you guys are thinking? We even put it on the radar.
I'm certainly surprised.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, chemical engineering. Is that there?
Let's come back. Yep, chemical engineering is number 5.
Okay.
An early career salary of 64. So if we look at men, it is not in the top 15.
Okay.
Most male-dominated STEM degrees.
Okay. And it could be my knowledge coming from California.
Yeah.
I think Berkeley, the women outnumber the men just at Berkeley, though. So I think it's a regional thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you're bringing all this up, just so I can recalibrate my understanding. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
These are U.S. numbers, I'm sure, but
Yeah.
do you know how they compare to other countries or in the world?
It's a really great question. I did not pull that data for this talk.
How about
And
the whole kind of STEM? And that, I mean, obviously, your frame of reference is America, but I wonder if just through other things, you know how other countries stack up.
Mm-hmm.
What's
Where my mind goes on.
startling,
Yeah.
sorry, I was going to say what's startling to me is like the actual word engineering within all the male top 10. Yeah.
And you compare that to the 15, well, 14 on this list, but the 15 female-dominated STEM degrees: animal science, zoology, interior architecture, biology, physiology, ecology. Like that, yes, there's a qualitative difference in how these majors sound. I think that that's important to note. So, why is this important? Why do we need to talk about these things? Well, I think one of the things that we need to bring to the table is acknowledging that there is this difference. And there continues to be a difference, even though we as a society and a culture and educators are trying to make changes. We still have a difference. And that's what brings us to this equality versus equity slide. How familiar are people with these concepts? Are there things that you guys talk about? You talk about in school, in your classes, things you've considered? Seeing some heads nod. So yeah, maybe.
I think they come up more in terms of race as opposed to gender.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I speak to my students at the very beginning of the year about bias, their own personal bias. Is it a dichotomous? They either think they're good at math or bad at math. They're good at science or they're bad at science. They could be really good at English, and here they are in a physics class, and they're like, whoa. But I talk about this study where they formalize an assessment for this group of people, and then when they unformalize it, the women and the other socioeconomic background people do better because I'm conscious about personal bias getting in the way of their advancing their a lot of things about how they think about themselves, whether they're good or bad at something. So I just, I listen to NPR on the weekends and then I come back on hey, I heard this really, this is what teaches me about working with this group of kids. And I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of, if you look at me, I'm not that typical white male physics guy. And I sometimes I'm apologetic that, eventually I'll phase out and retire out, and then hopefully maybe somebody that is representative of the class that takes the science courses will come in. But I think about these things.
Yeah. And as we talk about next steps and what we do, thinking about these things, having conversations about these things, that's the crux of the talk. That's the takeaway. We need to have these conversations. We need to have visual aids and talk about, well, why does equality look different than equity, and why are these important things for us to be considering? In many ways, in our culture, it was formed under a patriarchy, which defined men, specifically white heterosexual men, as the norm. So that's how we learn to create these boxes in this picture that these people are standing on, that we form-fitted the boxes for a specific demographic, specifically white heterosexual men. And for many, many years in science and research, that was what we considered to be a normative control sample, that we were supposed to be able to extrapolate data from that group and apply it to all groups. Thankfully, we've learned the error of that ways, and that not all groups are the same, and not everyone comes to the table with an equal playing field. And so that's where equity comes in, that in order for all three people to reach the apples, they may need a different size box to stand on, because we all come to the table with unique strengths and weaknesses. As it applies to STEM education, I think one of the things that we really need to acknowledge and focus on is that STEM fields have this reputation of being more masculine, and really unpacking what that means. And I wonder if, June, you wanna take this over from here and talk a little bit about your experiences with coming into the field and that gender difference as we transition into some of the microaggressions.
Well, I think what I wanted to communicate was, with the equality versus equity, was getting more women into the field will inspire other women to get into the field. And if you don't see those examples, you're not as likely to get into it. So I had the example of my sister and my mom and my dad and my brother, so that inspired me. If you see it, you do it. But how do you, who talked about getting the kids 3rd or the 4th grade? How do you reach those girls that aren't going to have those examples? How do you do that type of outreach to provide those examples for people who aren't going to have them in their families, like we did?
June, I'm gonna say something that's unfair, because I knew your father and mother, and I said I expected as much from
Yep.
you.
Right. Exactly. If you see it and you're around it, you're gonna do it. So how do you make it? How do you kind of even the playing field there to more young girls?
Hopefully the young teachers, are trying to do that. And that's where I think we as parents have to, take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and, introduce it to our kids. We've done that through like the library offering programs. Our own school, has had some things which have been great for even the young kids.
Yep, I can tell you at Volva we've started to do that, those types of outreaches too. I think we've done 2 now. One with Girls Inc., which it was before I started, but another one with my mom's school. We just bought kits and we went to the Discovery Center. So people are becoming, we're becoming more aware of it. And like Stephanie said, I guess it's conversations that keep us all talking about it and is going to propel everyone forward.
And I think that those conversations they're verbal and they're nonverbal. Jack, what were you thinking? I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, so I was going to ask a question about, in this example on the screen that's pulled up, the boxes represent equal equity. How does that translate to topic of women in STEM? Like what, so to speak, levels the playing field with heights and boxes, and how does that translate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a big piece of it is this visual representation. It's when I look up to create a PowerPoint for today, and I click on the education tab, and I go back, and the picture on the main screen are 2 women scientists. That is small, it may be overlooked by many, but it is such a powerful image for people who are looking for especially women, small girls who are looking for representation within this field of someone who looks like me, and then maybe I can see myself doing it. Another piece is mentorship, and like Dave said, having expectations for girls and boys, but being careful that we're not unintentionally engaging in some microaggressions, or more specifically the micro invalidations, by being mindful of what those expectations are and how they are different for each person.
Yeah, Jack, I also think as a teacher, and maybe anyone, you can be like, well, I have a boy and a girl in my class, and they're both in the same class, and I'm saying the same thing to them. And if the boy does better, it must be because he's better at math, and the fact is that, they're not coming from the same place, and, or they've got different skills or something like that. And so I think it's easy to be like, well, boys have always done better at math, because they're in the same class. And that's, if you think, they're not coming from equal footing. So I think that this picture kind of, without being able to say that what the bricks are, is just knowing that there are bricks there that really have to be in order for it to be equitable.
Yeah, I think. Oh, sorry. I was going to say awareness is definitely a big key, but one thing that was mentioned was mentorship. And I think that comes a lot from like the top down, maybe. So like current leadership, there isn't this diversity. So how can, I guess, framing it in like more of a personal standpoint, how do students that see their peers, how can they be mentors in like a non-traditional sense, since mentorship usually is associated with like either a power dynamic of like a teacher student or like a leader follower? How can like it be more horizontal, like a student to student sort of mentorship?
Jack, can I say something? My name's Christy, by the way. I noticed my name's not up there. It says WeSpeak. I teach math here, and Jack, to your question, both questions really. I see things like the Math and Science Center and the people who are on staff in the Math and Science Center, and the really conscious choice of having girls in leadership in that group. And I also see, in terms of this slide and the bricks, there's so many different things that those bricks could be. And I'll just throw out an example that I thought of when you asked the question. And like for me, and it's very stereotypical, right, to think that, or to have this notion that girls tend to be much more verbal. And what I've found in my classes over the years is that when I allow students, girls or boys, who tend to be more verbal, for example, to take a test in the hallway and talk themselves through the exam rather than sitting in a silent classroom, that's a brick, right? Like I'm giving them a different way or something else that they need that allows them to do their best while keeping the expectations the same for everyone. I still expect them to solve the problems. I still expect them to communicate their work efficiently and effectively and exactly. But if it requires a student to talk it through, I try that, or a variety of different things. Those are just some examples that I've thought of just in these few minutes. And that might be helpful to put some tangible things to at least what we can do in the classroom. There's a million of them, but sometimes it's trial and error. And sometimes it's, we don't figure it out sometimes until it's, I don't want to say too late, but until some damage is done, especially if we're talking 3rd and 4th graders who need that intervention at an earlier age. And so anyway, I could talk on, but those are just a few thoughts about those items. My name's Christy again. I know it doesn't say that, so.
Thank you, Christy. And Jack, to answer your question about what a peer can do on a peer-to-peer level, some of the things that really come to my mind are being aware of the power differentials, being aware that if you walk into a room and you look around and don't see anyone who looks like you or represents you, that can feel incredibly intimidating. And whether that is gender or race or physical handicap or disability, that we're talking about the power differentials that come from identifying or perceiving yourself as on the outside. And so things that you can do could be really taking the extra effort to include these people, asking the person who looks different than you to sit next to you, inviting them into conversation, asking them for help, or creating the space for them to show what they know. I think just having the conversation and being that voice and knowing that these individuals may not feel comfortable initiating the conversation.
No, thank you for that. Yeah, I think that's interesting because it transcends this topic and just in general, just having decency towards all people.
Yes.
Yeah,
Very much agreed.
I'll add something. And I may be putting Jack on the spot because I had Jack as the AP Physics student, the calculus base, and in that class, you'll have people that are taking it as a first year course, or they had the prerequisite course last year. They're taking AB calculus, or they have taken AB, or they've taken BC, or they're now concurrently taking BC calc. So there's this a wide range of where people are, and that becomes obvious on day one because they start looking at each other. Oh, I already had BC, I got a 5, and then everybody's like looking at this person like, oh, he's going to dominate or she's going to dominate. I had a student say to me, Mr. Holzer, this is unfair. I'm taking this as a first year course. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a prerequisite. So I didn't say that, but I have to modify what I think the students are bringing to the table. And I think Jack knows the sort of those intangibles and ponderables that go on among the students in their various degrees, what they bring to the course. So I look at those boxes. I see the AB concurrent take calc kid, the kid that has already had calculus. So that's how I see that, and then it's my job to add a box so they can step on it, and everybody has equal access to the fruit.
Yeah, I'm gonna shout you out, Mr. Holsworth, because your class definitely is one of those where you definitely make sure everybody is on level footing. I will say an observation, just thinking back on it, in honors physics last year, I would say that from a gender standpoint, it was about 50-50. But then moving on to the AP calculus curriculum, there definitely is like an imbalance, and I'm not sure like what the reasoning for that is. Even though there is an imbalance, the women in our class definitely blow everyone away, so we don't have to worry about that. But it is interesting how that works. So just an observation.
And that's just this year. So if I got hired back because of this year, it could be different next year. I'll be packing if it doesn't work out.
Well, we'll hope that doesn't happen. So moving forward to hit a couple of these topics and be mindful of time, I wanted to do our first key topic on microaggression. How familiar are you guys with the concept of microaggression? Yay-ish, kind of, yeah. Okay, so we're talking here, really great psychologist, Sue, came up with this definition. The microaggressions are commonplace verbal or behavioral indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, which communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative cultural slights or insults. Essentially, they're automatic, often unconscious words or gestures that subtly send hurtful or dismissive messages towards an individual due to their group identity. And this isn't linked to just gender. It can be any diversity variable. It's really important to note that microaggressions are usually committed by well-intentioned people who are unaware of the hidden messages being communicated. There are 3 types of microaggressions that go from micro assaults down to micro invalidations, with micro assaults being the most damaging, the most overt of them. That micro assaults are, in this example, would be blatant sexist slurs or catcalling. Micro insults would be subtler, negative communication about women. Micro invalidation, subtle communication that dismisses or devalues women's thoughts or feelings. So examples of common microaggressions within STEM could be having lower expectations for one gender over the other, responding with shock or surprise when a female answers a challenging question correctly, calling on one gender more than the other in class. And actually, this goes back to some research that I will say for elementary age children. They compared, they had a psychologist in the room and looked at which kids the teacher called on in 3rd and 4th grade. And they found that of all the kids are still excited. They want to answer the questions then, right? So they're all raising their hands. The attractive children got called on more than the unattractive children. And the idea behind that was then these children are getting that extra opportunity for specific labeled praise, that they're being reinforced more because of the way they look, because they had the opportunity to answer a question correctly and have that shout out in front of the rest of the kids. This is social psychology, and it would be a mistake to assume that that exists just in elementary school or just with level of attraction. That I believe, and I would argue, that these same types of micro-invalidation would occur throughout STEM. That if we come in with the preconceived notion that this is a male-dominated field and boys are better at this than girls, then if we're asking a particularly challenging question, we may be more likely to, for the sake of time, call on the person we think who's going to get it right. And if more often than that, that is a male than a female, then we have a problem. Because we're contributing to giving certain people in the classroom additional opportunity to get that praise. Other examples, denying the experiences of students by questioning the credibility or validity of their stories. Telling a woman who's advocating for change in her grade that she is being overly emotional or asking if she is menstruating. Featuring pictures of students of only one gender on the school website. Using sexist language. Using exclusively male pronouns during examples or class discussions. Singling out the lone female in the class to ask if she is understanding the material, which implies that she's less capable and thus in need of additional help. So I think the thing to remember about microaggressions is even when it can feel like you're trying to do the right thing and call on a student who you think is struggling, try to be mindful of, does this only happen when you feel like a female student is struggling? Or would you be just as willing, just as likely to call out a male student who's struggling? Thoughts? Other experiences or examples of microaggressions that we want to throw out?
Well, I attended the Student Diversity Leadership Conference in 2018 in Nashville, and microaggression was definitely like one of the hot topics. And after that, a few peers and I actually started a column in the Mercersburg newspaper that was dedicated towards microaggressions and cultural competency.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first article was actually about microaggressions. It's something that I've dealt with, but more for ethnic reasons. But you make those examples that you stated were kind of eye-opening, a little bit surprising. Some little things that if you don't actually have that frame of reference, you wouldn't actually consider. So I'm glad that you shared them.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about this earlier, but I think the classic one is that boys are good at math and girls work hard. That's
Mm-hmm.
often the early thing to say, that they go, that if it's a he, they say he's really good
Mm-hmm.
at math, and if it's a her, they say she works hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I may have said this to Jack's class, but going back to where everybody identifies the strong student in the class, and there tends to be an underperformance because of that. Again, that the bias kicks in, and they don't think they're that good because somebody else is better. And apparently that's true for boys. So the top male student, and then the other boys identify, they tend to underperform, where girls end up, yeah, they know that person's in the class, and even in that same gender, but they all work hard to be as good, if not better. And I have frustration. I see it all the time where, we say the microaggression, those slight insults that happen in the class, under the breath. And I have 90% of communication is nonverbal. So you can, these physical cues that boys give off, and females. So but gosh, I'm going to stop there. But I do know, in my frustration, in my mind, I walk out of the class some days saying, Mercersburg could be the premier all-girls school in the nation. and because I'm like, gosh, if we just remove this, in some days I get a little, and this is the ground. I'm speaking from the trenches. I'm not at the upper levels, where we promote. We try to paint our Mercersburg as being this incredibly wonderful community. We are, but I got to tell you, when you're digging a ditch, it's dirty down there, and you see a bunch of stuff that's not beautiful, but we strive to get better. I'll end there.
June, I wonder if you want to share some of your insights about how the shift has happened at Volvo over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I can definitely say that when I started at Volvo 10 years ago, there was definitely more of a boys club, I guess, feeling. And over the past, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, there's just been a huge shift about paying attention to the atmosphere and promoting women and making sure that, people feel comfortable. So I think it's dependent also where you are in society, is how your experience is as a female, is how much discrimination you face or not. So it's related to privilege, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as we talk about things we can do, right? So we're presenting, this is the problem and things that can help. We know when we communicate directly about microaggressions or communication patterns, when we call it into the room, that helps. And we can do that as peers. We can do that when we're in positions of power. I know, June, you were sharing about some meetings that the female employees get. You want to share a little bit about one of those interventions?
Yep. So currently we have this program where we meet with our vice president every couple of months, which is just an open forum for anyone to share any issues that we're having. Like I talked about, we're having the outreach within the local community to girls, to try to reach them at a young age, just to try to show that this is fun and this is something you can do, to kind of put it down there in their subconscious.
So having that mentorship, having that forum, that's a great example of equity, that having the place for communication to encourage this communication is huge. When they're on the front line, other things we can do, we can inquire. So we're hearing something, we're not quite sure, it sounds like it could be interpreted as a form of microaggression. Help me understand what you're thinking, paraphrase or reflect that. I heard you say this, reframe it, like, let's reframe that to a more helpful thought or a more useful thought. Use I statements or use preference statements. I prefer blank. Redirect the conversation. Or use strategic questions. So what impact do you think that this comment has? Or what was the intent of you saying this? Or, sometimes it's hard to invite these conversations in the moment, in the room. And I know as good as anybody else, sometimes it takes me a while to collect my thoughts and figure out what I want to say. But as I'm mulling over that and thinking, man, I really should have stepped up. I should have called it out. Just because that moment's passed doesn't mean that your door is closed. That you can revisit, you can talk with the person about this later, once the iron has cooled, like once the emotional intensity has gone down. Next, we're going to talk about compensation and benefits and really what this looks like, especially within STEM education and STEM careers, why this matters. So what we see here, slide, how much do women make compared to men? So this is, pay scale is a really great resource that looks at gender equity as it relates to compensation. So this is their data from 2020. So they have an uncontrolled gender pay gap. So this measures median salary for all men and women, and found that women earn 81 cents for every $1 earned by a man. Now, the controlled gender pay gap, which measures the median salary for men and women with the same job and qualifications, shows that women earn 98 cents for every $1 earned by men. In fact, the only time in their research that the pay gap is zero, there is 0% difference between what a woman makes and what a man makes, is when we compare single childless men to single childless women with the same jobs and experience, who never prioritize personal lives over professional lives. So, what do these numbers mean to you guys? How do you understand the difference between the uncontrolled versus the controlled pay gap? What are we supposed to take from this data?
Is this in STEM fields or is this in all fields?
This is all fields. I'm going to give you the STEM numbers here in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of this is cultural too, whether it's men are more likely to ask for raises, men are more likely to refuse their first job offer. Obviously with something like raises that are percentage, then it's growing exponential. So it kind of, longer people work, the bigger the gap becomes. So not that surprising to me, actually.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something really important there, Jason, that in a lot of the research, we're showing that there is a motherhood penalty. Women are more likely to take a break during their careers, to have children, or to seek lower paid positions that offer more flexibility in order to make it easier to manage a family. Some people mistakenly assume that this explains the gender wage gap and that we shouldn't worry about it, but this doesn't fully count for it, because even when we look at the controlled gender pay gap, there's still a discrepancy there. We're saying that men and women with the same job and same qualifications, women are still making 2 cents less than men. Okay, 2 cents for every dollar. Like, why should that matter? But we're talking about over the course of a career, $100,000, $200,000. That could be an entire extra year of work that a woman has to do to make the same or the same job as a man. When we talk about within STEM, the numbers are a little bit better. That the uncontrolled gender pay gap is 85 cents to the dollar. The controlled gender pay gap is $1 to the dollar. So women in STEM fields with the same job and qualifications are making just as much as men. However, what this data also tells us is that women in STEM fields are often employed in lower roles than their male peers. In large part, we assume because of this motherhood penalty or other assumptions and biases about women. We also know that one of the things that you said earlier, I think it was you, Jason, who brought this up, women are less likely to negotiate compensation. 2 out of 3 women, 68%, reported that they did not negotiate pay, compared to just about 52% of men. And I think this is one of the ways where mentorship becomes really important. Knowing that this is how you do it and you should negotiate becomes crucial in having these conversations. So tips, we put together some tips for women to negotiate compensation. So going into these conversations, knowing how much you want to earn, quantify your worth. Know that it's acceptable to ask. In fact, there's this one study that I really like. It looked at women negotiating compared to men negotiating for salaries. And they found that women tend to not negotiate, right? That's what the data is showing. Women are more likely to accept an offer that is given to them. However, if they prepped the woman beforehand with thoughts about her family and encouraged her to think about the ways in which that additional resource, financial resource or benefits, would impact and improve the quality of life for their family, they were just as successful at negotiating as men. So, other things we know to be helpful are assessing, if the base salary is not negotiable, as it is in many STEM fields. That's one of the ways that I think this industry is trying to bridge this gender gap, is making standard pay. So if this is your role, this is your status, this is your licensure, or this is your profession, this is what we pay someone in that role. But not stopping there. So let's say base salary is equal. Inquire about other benefits, bonuses, benefits, sign-on bonuses, student loan repayment, continuing education resources. Asking what other forms of compensation they offer. Getting an advocate, somebody who's tread the water before you, a mentor to look to ask these questions for, to prep or role play. Use assertive communication, and be prepared to justify why you are worth a higher salary. Making the arguments in your head and practicing them out loud with somebody else. Keeping it positive. What do you want to add, June? You're an insight person. Make this come alive.
I think that's great. I think you did great.
Yeah. You want to talk about your experiences negotiating compensation?
I didn't have a bad experience with this. I was lucky. So I'm not one of the ones. I'm fighting for us, Steph. Fighting the good fight.
And you said that you went in and you advocated for yourself. You were asked how much money you needed, and you shot high.
Yep.
And you were given it.
Yep. Right.
So I think that is testament to setting our sights high. I went into my negotiation and was told, this is the package, this is what we offer, we don't negotiate, take it or leave it. And I was like, all right, sign me up, let's take it, right? And then about a year later, we were interviewing for another psychologist, and a very dear, male colleague of mine, and he was asked at our lunch by our chief medical officer at the time, said, everyone, we really like you. What would make this a really amazing offer for you? What would make this a deal for you? What would make it so you would sign on with us today? And he said, student loan repayment. And I was like, there's so many things wrong with this right now. At my lunch with that same medical officer, I was not asked what is going to make this a sweet deal for me. And second, why didn't I think of that? This is such an amazing thing to advocate for. So, the conversations, the communication, taking a risk, asking for what you want, but knowing and having the conversations with others in the field or in your life to know what sort of things you could ask for. I know we're running short on time, so I'm going to move forward. Family planning. This is another really important part of the STEM inequalities, because we've already talked about part of what factors into women making less is this motherhood penalty, taking time or choosing more flexibility over more pay. So one of the things to really keep in mind is the mean age of first birth. When I did a very short scan of the literature, showing rate numbers anywhere from 23 to about 27. Well, individuals are typically entering the workforce after college between the ages of 22 and 30. This is right during childbearing years. And when we're talking about some of these fields in science and technology, really in medicine too. I know it's not technically one of the STEMs, but in my mind and heart it is. We're talking about not just ending at bachelor's degree, but continuing into higher education above and beyond that. We may be talking about 4 years of medical school or 4 years of a doctoral program, and then a year of an internship or 4 years of residency. That we're talking about these specific training opportunities, that there's so much more than any reasonable person can pack into those times that are being packed in those times. And it's also happening during childbearing years. That we think about it from a medical standpoint, you hit 35 any point in your pregnancy and you're classified as a geriatric pregnancy. That comes with increased health risks. And so we have a lot of women in these fields pursuing this training, things they've been working for their entire lives since they were 5 years old or younger, and are now already having to choose between training and family. And what am I willing to sacrifice because I want this family? And is that going to make my employers or my supervisors think less of me because I'm choosing both? Do they feel like I will not be as capable because I'm also choosing this? And I think these are really, really important conversations to have and to talk at the mentorship level, at the peer level, but also at the employment level. So tips, things that we're thinking and takeaways, ask to review any written policies, documentation on family planning. Review state and federal guidelines. One of the things that impacts our trainees is that in order for FMLA to kick in, you have to have been employed somewhere for 12 months. Our training years are 12 months in duration. So even if somebody came to us pregnant or became pregnant early on in their training year, FMLA would not necessarily protect them, protect their position. So we have to have these discussions early and often to allow adequate time for planning. Discuss, what are the options? Is this leave going to be paid or is it unpaid? How is that going to impact a woman who perhaps is having complications during the pregnancy and has to go on bed rest early and is missing more of that year, more of that training year than they thought they were, versus their male partner who does not have to take off time before the baby is born. That, in fact, when we look at hireability, there are some interesting studies that show that having a child makes a woman less desirable to be hired. Having a child makes a man, in fact, more desirable to be hired. Being aware of these things, having these conversations, advocating for your needs. And from a training program standpoint, having the conversations to balance everything, knowing that it probably all won't fit, but we have to give it our best shot. We have to find that middle ground to support the person and support women, to allow them continued access and growth in this field, because we need those voices. We need that diversity of voice. So I know I ran over, but questions or thoughts, things we want to discuss before we wrap up?
Yeah, I actually had one. First of all, thank you very much for this presentation.
Yeah.
But second of all, I've been thinking a lot about how the current pandemic is going to be influencing the future. And I know one of the things that you mentioned was like almost like the motherhood opportunity cost. How is that going to change as companies and government officials and employees kind of move to work at home positions, not only during the pandemic but after the pandemic?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So one of the reasons why I've been teleworking, and I'm a psychologist, so I see my patients through telemedicine, and it's been going really well for a lot of reasons. But I think one of the big reasons why it's been going so well for me is because I have a 3-year-old and a 9-month-old, and being able to do my work and see my patients, but then get a quick glimpse at the kids in between sessions, or I can go downstairs and I can breastfeed my son instead of having to pump and having that sterile experience. That having that increased connection with my family makes me feel more present with them, but it also makes me feel more energized and present with my patients. So I think that there's a lot of good that can come from this. And while there's so much devastation that has come from this pandemic, one of the good things is that it has forced the insurance companies and state legislatures to really look at telemedicine and putting it on the table, because there are some careers where it just makes sense that we don't have to do things the way we've always done them. And in fact, that idea, when we ask, why are we doing it this way? And the answer is, well, it's just the way we've always done it, I think is one of the most dangerous responses we can hear. So I wish I had a crystal ball and I could see into the future, but I hope that we can take all of the good from this and leave everything else behind.
I wondered, for June specifically, what was the male-female ratio, at a school like MIT, 15 years ago when you were a student? Do you recollect like it being really
Very
lopsided?
Very low, yes, very low. It was quite miserable in a lot of ways. Yep, it was pretty bad. I don't remember the exact number. I can look it up. I'm gonna guess maybe a third, 30% or something like that, but that's a total guess.
I was thinking about you when Steph moved into the microaggressions and wondering about MIT and what the environment would have been like.
So at MIT, I don't know if, everyone's so young, and so everyone's so confused anyway. So there was a lot of, I would say, microaggressions between people. They weren't really the best socially. So I don't really know how big of a part gender was in that versus other things. I can definitely say there were microaggressions when I started at Volvo. Just some situations, and they're not even doing it intentionally, but it's just situations that make it difficult to be in as a female. So I remember when I was there at the beginning, my first meeting with, upper management, and they obviously had been used to talking about things, so they started talking about porn came up. And it wasn't because I was there. I think more they were just used to talking about it in general, and then they were kind of embarrassed about it. And, what am I supposed to do? I'm just looking down at the table. So it's just situations that they're not used to girls being there. So they were used to acting a certain way. And then all of a sudden I was there, and I'm an inconvenience, you feel then, oh, I'm interrupting their club. But it's all changing. So it's not like that now. I mean, we just had our VP of HR or something talk about directly just saying, I hear there's a boys club here, talking to the directors and saying, that's not allowed. So it's discussions and dialogues. People are learning how to be better. it's all very positive. So I'm saying people are having different experiences now. You know, so it's good to have the discussions within your school to see how you all are doing.
You know, I want to be mindful of time, but one thing that I kept thinking of on this was, and this was probably 25 years ago or something, but there was a Barbie doll, a talking Barbie doll that came out where it said, you know, math is really hard, is what Barbie was saying. Sorry, but I mean that was a thing that was like very natural, you know, and you know, you know, and there was pushback for it. I think they ended up taking it off this stores and stuff. But you know, I'd like to think that would never even get that far anymore. But it's easy for me to say that, you know, and you know, I think discussions like these and Jack, it's so inspiring to have you here and be involved in it and all these things for sure. And you know, I like to think that there's improving, but the key is obviously to discussions like this. And so to June and Steph, thanks so much for, I mean, that went quick, obviously,
Yeah.
you know, and which is great to have people that are interested and engaged. And, you know, what a wonderful way to essentially give someone to think about as we kind of wrap up this series. And thank you for volunteering your time and sharing your story with us. And as I kind of reach out to everyone, I'll make sure to share. And you know, Mercersburg is going to continue to have these types of discussions. And I hope we can kind of rely on you guys to help us continue to lead the way in this way.
And if I can make one last plug, there's a great documentary. It's a little dated at this point. It came out in the early 2000s. It's called Misrepresentation. I don't know if anybody has watched. I see some heads nodding. It's on Netflix right now, and it is all about socialization of female gender, and it's really wonderful. Jen, did you have something you wanted to add on that? I saw you unmuted.
I just wanted to say thank you,
Yeah.
June and Steph. It's a lot of great things to think about and have conversations about. And it's nice to see you, Amy and Dave.
Yeah, it's good to see you guys. Hey,
You too, Jenny.
don't make any promises, but I think this would be a great format, the topic, the discussion, to have at the beginning of the year, the Faculty Institute, you know, what do we want to call it, in-service. And I also think it would be great for the students to hear the same message, you know, because sometimes we do the adult speak and then we do the student speak, but I think this could really be on an even playing field with both faculty and student understanding, and start the year off having this vocabulary, these ideas, and then talk about it.
Yeah, we're happy to help. I like having the conversations.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.